second. Excellent. Okay. So thank you all so much again. We are here to talk about the DEQ Brownfields Program Stakeholder EPA Assessment Grant. This is our stakeholder meeting group for all of those who are new. This is generally where we'll try to provide some updates of what we've been working on. And I really do try to provide some additional useful resources for your communities, as I know our grant and no one grant can really do everything. So that's my goal. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about our additional site selection process, where we're at on our priority sites. As you know, we had 5 to start with. So where were we at on those first 5? I do want to go into a little bit. I've had several conversations about the difference between state and federal brownfields. And so that is something that I do want to talk about a little bit as well. That would be really helpful for everybody, I think, to have a primer on. Then we're going to have ICMA speaking. They have a grant from EPA to provide technical assistance for brownfields properties. So they're going to be providing an overview of what their services can provide to your community. And then PTRC, Adam, is going to be talking about their revolving loan fund. They have a coalition revolving loan fund, which actually crosses both state lines and federal EPA regions. So a very unique opportunity for several of our counties overlap. So for those of you that may not happen to be within those counties of overlap, you are welcome to leave, or if you are interested in a revolving loan fund application from Brownfields, Adam is a great resource. So I would recommend sticking around for that for sure. All right, with that, let's get into the actual what we've been working on. So for those of you that are new, the state assessment funds are able to be spent in these 3 regions. These were primarily selected because of their disadvantaged nature. And we had 5 priority sites within these regions. We have started on Smoot Tannery, Beaufort Marine Park, and Pembroke Oil. Unfortunately, we had a property owner who's looking at some other options for Wooten. And in the Niquosi corridor, we may actually be switching properties. We're still looking at that. Again, and we had a property owner who was not, as you all know, they can be not so cooperative. So we are working through those issues, but we have started on the Smoot Tannery and those other 3 parcels. One of the other things we were able to complete today is our intake form, and that form is where we're going to request that that communities send in their additional sites that need assessment. It is now in PDF form and not in Microsoft Forms. Sorry, that took me a while, but we now have it. So if you have any, it's going to be something that I would like to talk to the community first before I send them that form. So it's not something that I'm just going to blanket post on our websites, just because I do want to have a concept of what, if I can kind of flush out whether it is an eligible property or not with them with a conversation first. So if you have a local community next door that's interested, please have them give me a call, and I'm certainly happy to talk to them first about the intake process and what our capabilities are with our grant funds. When we do start getting those rolling in, I've talked to one additional community thus far, so we don't have, a lot of these rolling in just yet. But if you would be interested in, my current plan is to have these reviewed and ranked internally by DEQ, just to keep some of that extra work off of our stakeholder group. But if there's anybody that's interested in a more active review process in those intake forms, I'm certainly happy to talk with you about that. Even a second or third review, that would be really helpful. I don't want to overtake your time though. So if that's something you're interested in, absolutely, please reach out. One of the other primary documents that we have to submit for EPA is called the generic QAP. It's a quality assurance project plan, and that kind of summarizes the overview of the quality components of the site work that we will be doing. With that, then each consultant will work on a site-specific quality assurance project plan, which is essentially the site-specific work plan for what we're actually going to do, what samples we're going to collect, where, how deep. And so that generic QAP was submitted to EPA and approved, which we were very excited about. So that means that we are on the path to submitting all of the next level of the site-specific work plans. So we actually, I'm going to talk a little bit about the 3 priority sites that we were able to start work on, as in boots on the ground, start work on. So Smoot Tannery, we were able to complete the phase 1 for that site. That was interesting because we do have some, as you'll see here, some property ownership and air issues. We are still researching those, but we were, with DEQ's authority, we were able to get a warrant to access that property and take a look around and see what the site conditions are. We knew it was a tannery, but what we were able to find is, you'll see on this map, this is kind of the summary of the historical tannery uses overlaid with the current buildings. So some of the buildings are from the tannery. A lot of them were destroyed in a flood in 1941. So where the actual tannery operations were was unclear, but with the phase 1, we were able to identify those locations. Also operated as International Shoe Company after the Smoot Tannery, and then Jenkins Wholesale Supply and Auto Sales and Restoration. So on top of the tannery, we have from the 1950s through about the 2000s, we have that many years of automobile repair as well. So we do have some historical underground storage tanks, hydraulic lifts, some chemicals that need to be disposed of. So we do kind of have a wide variety of potential contaminants on the Smoot Tannery property. One of the other challenges of this property is the condition of the site buildings. Many of them are not actually even safe to walk into, because of the nature of the roof collapses. You can see one of the hole in the roof here, in the aerial photograph. So we're working with our consultant on that site right now to come up with some demolition costs, and to see what phase 2 scope of work we could accomplish, without having to unsafely enter some of these buildings. So lots of ongoing work there. Pembroke Oil, we have submitted the site-specific QAP, that site-specific work plan. That was submitted last week, and we hope to actually be in the field with this in mid-May. We have tentatively scheduled the drillers and the site work, so that is really exciting. The scope of work, this is a very typical, for those of you who are not familiar with an environmental assessment, this is a pretty typical site map. We have overlaid, and this particular property is cleared and vacant. So there's no buildings, no demolition issues, just an open parcel. The town also has a very preliminary plan for a recreation center and some office space with a gym, stage kind of thing. So we were able to overlay both these historical uses, which are in pink. So these would be areas where there were underground storage tanks. This was a former bulk oil distribution building, and then this was pesticide and fertilizer storage areas. So we were able to overlay those historical with the proposed, and really target the sampling to those both historical and proposed uses. As soon as we get approval from EPA, we'll be able to start that site work. And Beaufort Marine Park. Beaufort Marine Park has a grant to conduct a boat ramp renovation, and this is the current condition of the boat ramp. So that site work is actually proposed to begin at the end of 2023. So we are working. The property is much larger than the area that the wildlife people are doing the boat restoration or the boat ramp restoration on. But because of the timing, what we opted to do is 2 phases of work. We're drafting a site-specific work plan right now based on the boat ramp plans. So we can look at where the soils will be disturbed, if any, where sediments will be disturbed, if any, and what sampling needs to be done so that we can be done with our assessment prior to their construction activities. That will be the first phase. The next phase of work will be assessing the remainder of the property. And so we're kind of working in 2 stages there just to make sure we can meet those deadlines of the construction schedule. This one actually had a phase 1 environmental site assessment already conducted, which is why we were able to start directly with a work plan. What we did was the consultants did a site visit to kind of confirm the conditions were similar to what the phase 1 had said. It was a few years old, but the historic data is still valid. They were also able to do their threatened and endangered species and historic preservation reviews. This is another requirement of EPA to make sure that our site work and our assessment is not going to impact either threatened and endangered species or any historic sites. Now, this is not kind of the end-all be-all for these evaluations. As you know, with federal dollars and construction, there may need to be some more detailed once you get into construction. But for us, for the site assessment, it's usually a preliminary overview to ensure just our soil borings and monitoring wells won't affect these potential resources. So we talked about 3 different sites. 2 of those sites, Pembroke Oil and Beaufort Marine, are actually already in the state Brownfields program. Smoot Tannery is not yet. Certainly it has the potential to come into the state program, but I did want to talk a little bit about the difference between federal and state. So the federal EPA provides for grant funding for assessment, risk assessment and cleanup planning, and of course, community outreach. They also fund the technical assistance for brownfields provider that ICMA is going to be speaking a little bit later. So EPA provides a lot of knowledge. They provide supervision of those grants. It is a cooperative agreement in which EPA is involved. It's not just here's your money, have, off with you. They are actively involved in the process. On the state side, however, we have a whole separate program it's a voluntary program that people can enter without having to have grant funds. So to get and the ultimate goal, the completed product of our program is what's called a notice of brownfields property. And that is what is ultimately recorded at the Register of Deeds that documents that this parcel, this specific tract of land is covered under a brownfields. Colloquially, we call it a brownfields agreement. So the state program is a voluntary program. It is an agreement between the state and a prospective developer. And that can be a municipality, it can be, but it most commonly at this point is a private developer. So we have a lot of private developers that come in and apply to be to get a notice of brownfields property in the end. What that does is places land use restrictions on the property. And that ensures that the intended reuse is a safe reuse of the property as long as those land use restrictions are complied with. That agreement also provides a state level liability protection to future owners. So when I say the notice of brownfields property is recorded, it is physically recorded at the Register of Deeds office in that county. So that is when the property transacts, those land use restrictions go with the land. So one of our common land use restrictions is not to use or drink from water supply wells. Most of the time, these are either abandoned during the process or they just didn't exist to begin with, and we don't want anybody to install new ones. So that land use restriction would run with the land for each future property owner. The Brownfields Agreement also provides that state level liability protection to future owners. So when we do our environmental assessments, and in this case, in the case of Beaufort Marine and Pembroke Oil, we're doing the assessment for the state Brownfields Agreement using the federal EPA funds. That's not always the case. Certainly for our private developers in the state, they don't have that option. They fund those assessments on their own and submit the reports to DEQ for review. So when those reports are done and when that assessment is done, we have an idea of what the level of contaminants are and the type of contaminants at the property. This ensures that the once the developer makes the site safe for the reuse with its end product, in accordance with the reviews and approvals required by the program, they are not a responsible party for that known contamination that has been documented as part of the agreement. And of course, developing, as you all know, developing on a brownfields property is typically more expensive than developing on a greenfield, right? There's a lot of benefits. We all know the benefits of working on a brownfields property versus a greenfields, but does require some additional cost. So the state program, when our statute came out, they provided some tax incentives for that redevelopment. And I'll go into those details a little bit later on. So as I mentioned, we definitely collaborate with EPA frequently, especially with our grant funding, but even other communities who have EPA grant funds outside of ours, they submit their site-specific work plans to our state program for review prior to conducting the work. And what this does is helps ensure that the data that you collect with your federal EPA dollars, even if they're not ours, like I said, are usable data in the event you opt to go into a state brownfields agreement. So, and EPA encourages, and so do we. We certainly encourage going through the state program when it's appropriate. But there certainly may be situations in which you don't need a state brownfields agreement. Kind of one of the typical examples I go to for that is if it's only a petroleum underground storage tank, you have no other issues at the site. They're able to remove the tank, and the tank is either not impacted or it's not impacted enough, and you're able to get what's called a notice of no further action through the underground storage tank section. That would certainly be a case where you don't need a brownfields agreement. But for many of our properties that have petroleum and pesticides and a variety of other contaminants or pathways for exposure, a brownfields agreement can certainly be useful in the long run. So in DEQ, we do retain the federal brownfields definition, which we all know. So that's one of the minimum requirements for coming into the program. The property's eligibility does have to meet this criteria. We have nearly 700 agreements across the state. And a prospective developer, which is the person who applies to the program, as I said, can be a private developer or it can be a municipality. And in our case, we have several that are municipalities. It can be done for the purposes of liability protections for your community, but also to get that kind of situate that property for redevelopment if you intend to later sell it to a developer. So there's a lot of different situations, and we're happy to, if you have some ideas, and we're happy to talk with you about all of those, but there's definitely different options you can go to. As a municipality, if you're the prospective developer, we do define the land use restrictions that run with the land and the intended use. So one of the land use restrictions, the very first one, is what is this property going to be used for? So you can kind of have a little bit more control in addition to your zoning requirements if you wanted to say we don't want to include parking, a surface parking lot in this area, or whatever the case may be. We can work with you on those land use definitions. It's important to note that a brownfields agreement is only for those who did not cause or contribute to the contamination. So we cannot write an agreement with a responsible party. And that's because we're providing that covenant not to sue between the state and the prospective developer for the known contaminants. If they're the responsible party, they're officially responsible for those contaminants. So this agreement actually does not affect the state's ability to enforce against that responsible party. If there's somebody already, we're working with a community who they actually have bankruptcy funds from a company that went out of business. They're able to continue to do the assessment work needed under those bankruptcy funds while the community is taking ownership and kind of moving the property forward during that process as well. As I mentioned, the land use restrictions do run with the land. So next property owner still has to comply with the same requirements. When you get the slides, if you're able to download them, this is linked. If you're ever curious, the Brownfields property project map does have all of our sites that are recorded, active, eligible, and so you can kind of take a look at what's available, what's some examples throughout the state. This is a little bit of what our process looks like. We get an application, and then there's an eligibility determination of both the property and the prospective developer. And this is where the prospective developer really has to prove that they're not a responsible party. Either they haven't purchased the property yet, they just purchased it 6 months ago, and they did a phase 1 prior to that. There's a lot of things that go into this, and we certainly try to make sure that there are no LLCs that involve the previous owner, property owner, responsible party. So we really do a detailed review of both the property and prospective developer. Once that's completed, it will eventually be assigned a Brownfields project manager who will review all the historical site information. And then they typically will have a kickoff meeting or a meeting with a consultant and developer to talk about what that scope of work needs to be. And when we will get a work plan, we actually have a similar work plan to the site-specific WAP. It's just in a little bit of a different format. So our work plans will be submitted, reviewed by DEQ and approved in a similar process. And then the consultant will go do the work. Once the work is completed, they submit the data back to the Brownfields program. The Brownfields program does a risk evaluation, looks at the data, and assuming no additional work is needed, then they draft the Brownfields agreement, and the prospective developer will draft the survey plat of the property. Once those documents are reviewed and kind of agreed upon between the developer and DEQ, there is a public notice. It is a 30-day public notice where it has to be notified. The paper has to be notified. A sign has to be posted at the site. So we do have a public notice minimum requirement. And then once those documents have been vetted, the prospective developer, they're signed, and the prospective developer records them at the Register of Deeds office. One of our because our program is voluntary, one of the standard land use restrictions we have is called a land use restriction update. And the land use restrictions do definitely vary by property. This is very site specific. We have a few that are consistent, but they are site specific. But we require essentially a self-certification annually by whoever the property owner is, that they are in compliance with their land use restrictions. What we want folks to do is read their land use restrictions every year and make sure that nothing has happened on the property that is in violation of those of that agreement. So what actually does this document look like, right? Like it's actually a pretty lengthy document that gets recorded at the Register of Deeds. As I said, it's called a Notice of Brownfields Property. That has a summary with the land use restrictions. And then the Brownfields Agreement is actually attached as Exhibit A. And that has more detail about the site history and lots of different legal requirements. There's a site location map, and then there's a table of the contaminants that are identified at the property. That is part of the Brownfields Agreement as well. Exhibit B is a survey plat. There's a kind of a blurry example of one here. Sorry about that. But there's actually 3 pages to the specific plat. It shows the Brownfields property boundary, which can include multiple parcels. So that's where we have to make sure that all parcels that are included are, shown. It will include the land use restrictions and that Exhibit 2, that table of contaminants, on the survey plat as well. So oftentimes these are 2 or 3 pages documents. And then finally, a legal description, of course, that matches up with our Brownfields property boundary. I'll pull this over and just kind of flip through. Right. So this is actually a fairly recent notice of Brownfields property. You'll see, it is recorded just like many other real estate documents, right? So, but then we go through the land use restrictions that are excerpted from the Brownfields Agreement. And then we go to Exhibit A. So there's the signatures of the recordation. Exhibit A is the Brownfields agreement. So this is where they really talk about the history, what's been done at the property. There's summaries of the reports that were reviewed as part of this. What environmental information did DEQ take into consideration as we were writing this agreement? Benefit to the community, certainly an important part of what we do, so that all of those are documented. And we get down to the end of the Brownfields agreement. We have the site location map, and this is the contaminant table. So this particular site had some chlorinated solvents and lead in groundwater, and that's documented here. One of the most important reasons why is because most of these contaminants are not allowed to be used at the property in the future. Then the survey plat and legal description. So that's ultimately the end goal. When we say we have a completed agreement, that's what this is. The land use restrictions that are on Brownfields properties are both standard and determined by risk. So a typical standard land use restriction would be that if you're going to disturb soil on the property, you have to contact DEQ and conduct and complete what's called an environmental management plan. So that is something that is required of all Brownfields properties now. Now there may be other sites. So if there's a vapor intrusion risk, there would be separate land use restrictions associated with that. Groundwater usage is a common one. We don't generally allow groundwater usage. But there may be an agreement. I can think of one that has a water supply well that is sampled annually, and they only use it for irrigation. So there are certainly some exceptions, and we do work with the property owners and prospective developers on that. I think it's important to note that our land use restrictions and our the approved definitions. So we'll have a definition for high density residential, for commercial, industrial. We have a brewery, restaurant, whatever land use is listed in the agreement as approved. We have definitions for that. But I think it's important to note that it doesn't supersede your local zoning or permitting processes. Oftentimes we'll have people come to us and say, well, we're allowed to do this. And we have to say, per the Brownfields agreement, that is an approved use, but that is not necessarily what the property is zoned for, nor is it something that the municipality would consider. So that is something that's important to note, that your local zoning requirements, we're not trying to supersede them. From a environmental risk perspective, we would approve that use, but only if it meets all other local and zoning processes. We do have, since we have 700 sites, almost 700, we have a whole unit, a whole branch now devoted to management of these existing properties, the property management branch. And we do have the authority to enforce our land use restrictions. And if there are, the statute allows us the option to reopen Brownfields agreements given a few criteria. One of those is the violation of the land use restrictions. If somebody, didn't give us the correct information, and if we have new information, obviously science is always changing, right? So if there's new information about a contaminant on site that we didn't know, that is a reason that we could potentially reopen an agreement. So the benefits are, obviously, why would you want to go through this whole process, right? It is long. The benefits of the state Brownfields program is the liability protection from the known contaminants, right? So typical environmental law is that if you buy the property, you buy all the problems with it. The Brownfields agreement, once that agreement notice is recorded, that draws a line in the sand as to what those future property owners are liable for. Obviously, our agreements don't cover if the new property owner, after the agreement spills oil on the property, that's not covered as they would be the responsible party for that. So they are protected from the known contaminants that were there prior to them purchasing the property. So it does cut off that liability. Our our agreements are based on risk-based use, and we are not cleaning up to a predefined level. So we often, when we say cleanup, often what that means is there are levels of contaminants left in place, but the pathways of exposure from the contaminant to the future users of the property is cut off. Whether that's from a cap of some kind, whether the cap is clean soil or asphalt or whatever the case may be, or for vapor, if a vapor mitigation system is installed to prevent migration of those contaminants into the air of the building. So our program does not require cleanup to that predefined level. So I think that's an important distinction when looking at other programs versus the Brownfields program. Of course, and there are also tax incentives. I mentioned those earlier. This is obviously not so much an incentive for municipalities, just because you don't pay taxes to yourself, right? So, but for developers, this is pretty significant. Tax incentives are available after the completion of eligible improvements, and those eligible improvements can include anything from a new roof all the way to a complete, demolition and then rebuild of something new. It is only for a period of 5 years, and it is a sliding scale based on the new appraised value. So the first year they'll pay 10, and I'm going to get the percentages wrong, so we'll have to look those up specifically. But for the first year, they pay a small amount, then they pay a little bit more the next year based on percentages until the 5th year. So, so I have talked to some communities about their concerns with not being able to recoup those get those taxes, but this really is only for a period of 5 years. And so if you get that, once you get that property developed, after that period of 5 years, you're getting the full taxes based on that new appraised value. So it is likely going to instigate additional development in the area as well, right? So while there is some tax abatement from these developments on the first 5 years, it is important to note that there is an end date on it. There may not be a dollar cap for the developer, but there is an end date to when those are completed. So I'm going to stop sharing really quick. And what I would like to do is first check the chat. If you have any questions, please feel free to hop in and ask questions, or if anybody wanted to speak up, raise your hand or whatever the case may be. But I do want to see if there's any questions about all of that. It's a lot of information. Sorry. Okay. So, and of course, if you ever have any questions about the difference or how brownfields can work for your community, let me know. I'm happy to have a conversation about it. No problem. With that, I am going to turn it over to Chris Harrell. He's actually going to share his slides. Chris is with ICMA, who's the technical assistance to Brownfields communities provider, and they have some really amazing opportunities. And I just wanted you all to be aware of them. We're working with him on Smoot Tannery, trying to get some ideas of what the end use for that property might be. So, Chris, if you want to take over, it is all yours.
Super. All right. Well, thank you, Jocelyn, and greetings all. I am Chris Harrell with ICMA, and technical assistance to brownfield communities. It's a large mouthful, but what we are here to do is here to help prepare sites to go through the process that was just explained. So we want to get communities ready to identify sites, to get those sites identified, to understand what is going on with them, and to move them forward in the process to get them ready to go through all the pieces that was discussed. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to share my screen. Have a little presentation to provide, and here we go. One second. And all right, there we go. Okay, so Region 4, we are all the way across Region 4, which includes the states you see here, which of course includes North Carolina. So what we provide is it's free. So number one, for the communities and those who need the technical assistance is free of no charge, and we have different levels of assistance we can provide based on intake and discussion. We also want to share news and information about each state's program and how communities can access that. When I say community, stakeholders in general, not just municipalities. So I want to be clear about that. And we are also trying to introduce peer-to-peer interaction, a new mode through our new website to let folks answer questions for other communities in their area, whether it's within their state or within the region itself. So next, we are also looking to determine what our Regions 4's needs, both in North Carolina and across each of the states. What that means is working with local government leaders, community-based organizations, private sector employers, and property owners. And when we take into account what their needs are, we can hopefully guide them in the process in each state or in each locality to move the ball forward on these brownfield properties. The tab process, we've created a new website to try to help share our ability to do this. We have large range in the type of assistance we can provide. The Brownfields 311 is our basic level. It's remote with 2 to 4 experts can join in the conversation and have a workup to gain an understanding of the conditions present on any particular property of question or concern and help guide those stakeholders in a path forward on that. What may happen is they may identify, oh, we have these specific needs on that particular property and may need to move to a higher level interaction. And that could be a Brownfields challenge assessment, which could include an in-person exploration of the site, follow up with state regulators, with DEQ and others, and put together planning with we have a group of contractors working with us that can help assess the conditions. And I want to be clear, the tab assistance is not assessment, okay? So I just want to make sure what it is not. And it is not brownfield assessment. Those funds are available through EPA and otherwise in a separate pool of funds. Ours are to help prepare both stakeholders and communities for the understanding of what it takes to move a brownfield forward and to build capacity with municipalities and stakeholders on identifying sites, prioritizing sites, and getting them to the state where they can go through the process. So I want to be very clear about that. So our Brown challenge assessments are assessments of the conditions surrounding a site or a group of sites, not assessing the site itself. So next, I also want to mention they can move forward into a brownfield implementation engagement. And those are situations where, hey, there's either a site or a group of sites, and they want to come up with ideas on how to address multivariate conditions around that site to get it prepared and ready, or a group of sites. And it can include many different pieces. Brownfield planning assistance. We have a group of planners and economic professionals that can look to do economic analyses of a site or a group of sites and look at more comprehensive ways. And we really stress trying to work both with the local community, the state, and stakeholder groups and organizations present. So each of these bits we like to tailor the assistance to each community or each subset of a community, maybe a little area or a district. Area-wide strategies with our team includes Clark Henry, myself, Chris Harrell, and Madeline Desi. And Clark and I have long been champions of area-wide strategies. So there's no shortage of ways we can come up with capturing more than just one-off sites as well. So we like to look and see how can one site being redeveloped in concert with another benefit both and the areas around them. We also provide stakeholder engagement. So if you need community engagement assistance to share understanding of what the condition of a site is and what it may become, that's another thing we can offer. Capacity building for municipalities. How do you deal with unwieldy EPA grants? How do you know when it's time to apply? There's many questions in this, but we want to try to help answer them. Also, we provide subject matter expertise on strange questions that may pop up about a site. If we don't know in our staff, we have a group of consultants that can help get that answer. And lastly, what the goal is to have more of this, to get sites to redevelopment, like the Smoot Tannery, like Pembroke Oil, and some that you've heard, to help communities get those sites to redevelopment. The ultimate goal, back on the tax rolls, productive and helpful in communities, and no longer contaminating communities. That's the key. So we'll also take questions at the end. And I will end sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Y'all, when I get the slides and post them online, you'll be able to should be able to click on all those links that from his presentation. So, did I hear somebody speak up to for a question? No. Anybody? Any questions in the chat? Yeah.
And you could always write me separately. We put our addresses up there if you have a question, and a burning question comes up 20 minutes after this is over. Happy to answer it anytime. So thank you.
Hey, Chris, I just wanted to ask really quick, did you mention where you are? I know Clark is down in Wilmington. Are you relatively local too?
Right. Well, we're based out of Washington, D.C., ICMA is, and our company is fully remote. So I spent the last 10 years of my life in Louisville and Bloomington, Indiana. Previously, I had a company that worked on brownfield redevelopment strategies, imagine that, for communities, municipalities, and developers. So I helped across the board through that effort, and that was focused mostly in Louisville and central Indiana. So I am personally based in Indianapolis, but I go all over Region 4 all the time. So I can meet you in person or by call or remotely like this, whatever works best.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for your presentation. That's great.
Oh, look forward to helping anyone that speaks up, and some that don't. We'll find you. Thank
you. All right. So I'm going to share my screen again here. We've got Adam Shull with PTRC is going to speak a little bit about their revolving loan fund. Adam, I was able to pull your slides in, so if you don't mind, I can control and you can speak. But I did want to say, kind of give everybody a visual. These are the North Carolina counties that are covered by both the Piedmont Triad Regional Commission and Triangle J Council of Governments was one of the partners. There are also counties in Virginia that are covered, but for our purposes, we're all North Carolina right now. So, so with that, Adam, if you would love to tell us about your RLF, I'd be most grateful.
Yeah, thank you, Jocelyn. Thanks so much. And so good to be here this morning virtually. Really appreciate this opportunity and thought it might be of interest just to highlight another component of the Brownfield program, broadly. We've heard a lot this morning about assessment grants and how important that work is. The revolving loan fund offers some loan and sub-grants for when cleanup activities are kind of ready to go. That doesn't mean someone can't engage with us if the site, isn't quite ready for that, but wanted to give some details about our coalition, kind of what we are, who we are, but then just plug in, kind of give you a sense of where this work can go and how a revolving loan fund could perhaps fit in. So like Dawson said, I'm Adam Shull, I'm Assistant Director of Regional Planning for the Piedmont Triad Regional Council. I may beat Chris for the words and acronyms in the title. It's a lot. For folks who might know about councils of government, there are 16 of us across North Carolina. PTRC covers 12 counties in the Triad region, and we were officially the recipient of the grant, but we were working with 2 other COG regions. So that expands to 23 counties and in which this program is eligible. And that includes all the municipalities inside those counties. And as the slide here has some details, it was a $1 million award with which we're able to offer loans. So initially here in this first year, that's at $750,000. And then we have some funds left for subgrants. other than the obvious that, one's a loan, one's a grant, who can be eligible for each is a little different, where a subgrant can go to a local government and not a nonprofit per se. So just some subtle differences there, but the unique part of our program is the location or just the number of counties, and that it covers 3 COG regions in North Carolina and Virginia. And the other unique piece is that we cross state lines. So depending on the location of the site that might be ready for a revolving loan, we may be working with the state program in Virginia or Jocelyn and her counterparts in North Carolina. So that's been interesting to learn about. PTRC and Triangle J are obviously in North Carolina and experienced with that process with the state and with those stakeholders. So this is kind of a fascinating case for EPA. They're interested to see how this will go, and we just benefit from having a large chunk of 2 states be eligible for this. And Jocelyn, if you want to go ahead to the next slide, just wanted to provide this may be more helpful for folks when reviewing slides that Jocelyn sends out, but wanted to just put the actual counties so everyone knows kind of where we're talking about. Again, PTRC is based in Kernersville in Forsyth County, but we are used to working in our region and our counterparts in these other COGs. I can't remember, Jocelyn, if we gave the handout, but we have one to share that also has some of this information. And I meant to mention, I've put in the chat a direct link, kind of a shortened URL to our website that has a lot of information about our program. So feel free to go there too. You'll find information like this on our website, that when we talk revolving loan fund, I'm somewhat experienced, I feel like, in brownfields and in development projects, but that still doesn't mean I'm a finance professional. So we have a loan committee and also advisory groups. I'll say a little bit more about that later, but sharing that just to say we have a loan committee that is stocked with folks who know how to set appropriate interest rates and how that can be set with a revolving loan fund. A lot of times developers want to know, that's kind of their first question, or one of their first. And we're working that process out and actually have that codified so that we can engage with communities, stakeholders, local governments, potential developers to kind of explain how a revolving loan fund can be enticing with either a low interest rate, lower than the prime interest rate, or no interest rate, again, all dependent on what the project is, what the components of it are, the pro forma, all of that good stuff. Again, all that financial stuff that our loan committee can provide expertise for. Some things that are helpful to know now, we do have some minimum amounts for a loan, and it can go up to right now $750,000. An interesting piece to the loan, we're thinking of the loans, is that a revolving loan fund means you're not done. We had some thought there where if we have a $500,000 loan for a project and that goes through, the whole idea of the revolving loan is that it replenishes itself through those regular payments. So we're thinking about how to communicate that to folks. So, if they see a headline or hear that, one loan takes up $500,000 or $700,000, we're not necessarily done. The whole point is that the more projects, the more the revolving loan fund can grow. So when we get to the subgrant, it is just interesting here, just at overview level, to kind of understand that a project can have complementary pieces. So we can have a loan, we can have a subgrant for the same project. Again, there's a little difference in who's eligible, but that we have seen in other case studies be really effective for helping a project move forward. So you can think about having a loan and subgrant awarded at the same time, covering different pieces, maybe different applicants, depending on the makeup of the project. And that's seen as flexibility within the revolving loan fund with Brownfield, in a way to move some things forward if that's helpful for a developer and the stakeholders involved. So I thought I would just mention that there. And again, another difference along with who's eligible with the subgrant, there's some match assistance that is strongly encouraged. and the guidance from EPA is that at least that 1-to-1 ratio. And you see some information about local cost share when you're thinking RLF. There are some minimums there with the 20%. There is a waiver available if you can make that case, and maybe we'll find a case like that. It'd be interesting to see. And then there's some details about what can count toward that cost share and what cannot. What cannot includes that land value, ineligible construction, renovation, admin costs. So there are some things that you have to parse out when thinking of it, but it's fascinating to me, being, not the finance person, but understanding how these pieces can fit into a project and the planning of it. I hope developers and communities see that there's flexibility and there's the kind of ability to figure out project by project how this works. It's not set for every single project. And much like Jocelyn went over with their priority sites, we have a few target areas that we're looking at immediately. High Point, Siler City, and in Virginia, we have a site, the Blair's manufacturing site. So we're working through some of those projects. Didn't want to take up a bunch of your time, going through all that, but that works similarly as well. That we have some sites we're beginning with, but we are the starting gun has gone off, so to speak. We've launched this, it's available, and we're kind of in this mode of getting the word out. And to help do that, anyone if you specifically might be interested to learn more, or within your networks want to spread kind of this information and this availability, those are 3 great contacts. Jesse Day is the planning director. He's at a conference today, or he might have been speaking to you. But we have contacts at each COG region that you can feel free to reach out to, and we have our website with more information as well. It's just a fascinating part of Brownfields that we feel fortunate to be a part of, because again, the more activity we have, the more loans. There's greater capability to grow the fund itself, both through the number of projects we fund and also the opportunity, if the EPA has money, to go back on a yearly basis and request further capitalization. So this thing can really blossom if it's of value to the regions that we're covering, which we plan and hope that will happen. So who knows? Maybe talking about much more than $1 million available in funding, and that's our goal. So that's the really quick run through. I feel like I went pretty quickly, but if there are any questions, I hope I provided enough places to go for more information. But it's been interesting talking to Jocelyn and others in the brownfield world about how, EPA really pushes this comment out there that this is a redevelopment program. We rightfully so, get very into the details about, assessment work and all the processes that, are very important to making these projects happen. But at the end of the day, these are sites that need to be redeveloped and have some significant barriers to do so. And that revolving loan fund piece can really come in at that cleanup stage and be transformative. So we're just hoping to make that happen for folks. And thank you to anyone who can maybe spread the word or learn more.
Thank you so much. Anybody have any questions for Adam? Questions, comments? Type them in the chat. Well, y'all know where to find us. So all of our contact info is will be on the slides. I will load them up to Laserfiche hopefully by the end of the day today, if not Monday. So I want to thank you all for your time, and I'm sorry, there are gutter cleaners currently. My apologies. So if y'all have any questions, please reach out to us, and thank you again for attending.
Thank you.